Every week, the church secretary and I hand out lunches to anybody who comes by to ask for them. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, because that's when the office is open from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., the doorbell rings and lunches get handed out, and usually 2 by 2, so they can eat Monday and Tuesday and be back on Wednesday. Some need our toiletries bags too. Not as often, but we have shampoo and lotion and chapstick and sunscreen and toothbrushes and toothpaste and even feminine hygiene products for those who need them. One fellow always asks for a pad of paper, a pencil, and a pen, if we have it, and usually we do. Last week, though, I realized that I didn't know any of their names. Now, we don't ask for any kind of disclosure from people when they come to our doors. If you need a lunch from us, you need a lunch from us. Nobody has to prove anything to us. But I sat in my office for a while, and I tried to get to the bottom of why I have never asked these people, many of whom are regulars, their names. And I worry that I am afraid to know them, because to know them is to be grieved by the broken path that leads them to our doors every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for the only place they know they'll get lunch. And the connected question that I like to avoid is, can I actually claim that I'm loving my neighbor if I'm not willing to learn their names? We've been talking about the spiritual discipline of service since Easter Sunday, of the holiness of routine service, of the need to humbly receive service as we give it, and of the importance of a service that stays, is committed to one place. But all throughout these weeks, I've had this nagging voice whispering over my metaphorical shoulder a truth that I didn't want to hear, that it is possible to dedicate your life to serving others and to do it completely void of love. To give money and feel no qualm to tell the receiver, now don't use it on drugs. To help someone move and spend the whole time bemoaning how much time you've lost helping them move. To travel internationally for missions and prioritize the optics of helping people of color. And sometimes, many times, service can even be an act of dehumanization. The reduction of a fellow human to a metric of social media engagement or the padding of a corporate bottom line. The corporatization of pride parades comes to mind. It was only cool to have a rainbow on your McDonald's bag once the tides changed. Service done out of duty or self-aggrandizement can very quickly become service done with contempt. And contempt eventually transforms us into people who think of service and the people who need it as beneath them, who see the needs of their neighbors not as an opportunity to show God's love, but as a bother, and as sometimes as a threat. Case in point, a couple months ago, my neighborhood is a lot more organized than I ever gave them credit for, and we get newsletters. I don't know who prints it. I've never met any of the people who do anything. I don't ever go to any meetings. I am not an involved neighbor. But in our newsletter was a special section letting us know that they were having a conversation at the last meeting about our homeless friends who were living under the bridge at 610, and I was so afraid to read the next sentence because there was just such little chance that it would be a conversation of how we can help our neighbors who live under the bridge. And I was right to be afraid, because the next sentence was, we had the constable come and he made sure to let us know that they would be giving tickets to the people who live under the bridge. Because that's what people who are homeless need, a ticket. We are living in a world that has already become degraded by contemptuous service. In her piece, Please Admit You Don't Like Poor People So We Can Move On, essayist Hannah Brooks Olson says, you might think that visible poverty, like tent encampments, would prompt a tender response from people who have, but you would be incorrect. Research has found over and over again that increases in visible poverty result in increases in wealth inequality, and the haves, in this case, are less charitable, less generous, and less emotionally drawn to help when they can see how much the have-nots don't have. Contempt has entered our neighborhoods, and it has entered our hearts, and it is visible, our contempt for the poor and those in need, even in our government. Last June, UN Special Reporter on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, his name is Philip Alston, had this to say in a report he gave to the UN Human Rights Council on conditions in the United States. For one of the world's wealthiest countries to have 40 million people living in poverty, and over 5 million living in quote-unquote third world conditions is cruel and is inhuman. The recent federal strategies seem to be tailor-made to maximize inequality and to plunge deliberately millions of working Americans and those unable to work into penury. Locking up the poor precisely because they are poor, greatly exaggerating the amount of fraud in the system, shaming those who need assistance, and devising even more obstacles to prevent people from getting benefits is not a strategy to reduce or eliminate poverty. These policies seem driven primarily by contempt, and sometimes even by hatred for the poor. That is a world away from Jesus and the community he founded. Over and over and over and over and over and over again, Jesus roots all of his teachings and all of his actions in love. When he teaches a frightened Pharisee at night, he tells him God loved this world so much that he sent his only Son so that everyone who would believe in him would not perish but would live eternally. When Jesus teaches his disciples in crowds on a mountaintop, he teaches them about love. You have heard it said to you that you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I am here to tell you that you should love your enemies, and you should even pray for people who persecute you. When Jesus appears to Simon Peter after his resurrection from the dead, he calls Peter to the task of service found in love in him. Simon, son of John, do you love me more than anybody else? And Simon said, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus said, well, then feed my sheep. The early church picks up the refrain and runs with it. Jesus' brother James teaches his churches, you would do well if you would really fulfill the royal law according to Scripture that you should love your neighbor as you love yourself. The Apostle Paul writes passionately to his congregation in Corinth about the love they need to have for each other. You usually hear this at weddings. It has nothing to do with romantic love. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels and I don't have love, I am a noisy gong. If I have prophetic powers and I understand all mysteries and have all knowledge and I have all the faith so that I can even move mountains and I don't have love, I am nothing. If I give away all of my possessions, if I even hand over my body to boast and I don't have love, I gain nothing. And our scripture writer, John, continues this teaching of love to the churches 60 years after Jesus' death, resurrection, and ascension. We know we have passed from death and into life because we love one another. Whoever does not love abides in death. And we know love by this, that Jesus laid down his life for us and that we should lay down our lives for one another. Because how does God's love abide in anyone who has all the world's goods and sees a brother and sister in need and refuses to help? Little children, John always called them children. I don't know how they felt about it, but that's what he called them. Little children, let us love. Not in words, not with speeches, but with action. Over and over and over and over and over again, it's love. Not romantic love, but the love of Christ that leads them to serve and to act and to forgive and to sacrifice and to remain in community with one another even when it's hard. This is not romance. This is self-giving, God-rooted love which considered even the enemy as fully human and fully equal and fully cherished in the kingdom of heaven. For Christians, the only possible way to be in service is to do so in love. If anything but love grounds our service, it has nothing to do with God. We need to be willing to examine ourselves and the whys of our acts of charity and service, whether they are for plant or animal or mineral or person. I know that persons are animals, but you get what I mean. So this week, your homework, I guess, as Janine calls it, I want you to do that. Whether you're giving your money or your time or your labor or your energy, I want you to walk yourselves through a series of questions. Would I do this if I could not get a tax deduction for it? Would I do this if no one could ever find out about it? Would I do this if I could get no sense of satisfaction out of it? Would I do this if it never produced any tangible change? Would I do this if the person or animal I helped was never thankful to me? Would I do this if I wasn't anxious about the future? Would I do this if I knew it could not be done perfectly? Now, the reason you ask these questions is not so you can get everything 100% right. It's to figure out what your actual motivations are as you serve. I am never going to be concerned about doing anything perfectly, not my personality. I do need to be concerned about whether or not I'm doing something out of fear. Like I said, there are a lot of reasons why people help their neighbors. But as a Christian, you have to be willing to consistently and constantly throw light into the shadowy places of the deep, deep parts of your heart to make sure that it is love that is motivating you. Never duty or obligation. Never fear of judgment. Never pride in self. Never in service to money or power. Never in patronizing disgust. Never in contempt for the one who visibly suffers. None of those. It can be none of those. Service must always be founded in the deep recognition that the neighbor is a human being, lovingly created in the very image of the invisible God, the one whom Christ was born and lived and taught and died and was resurrected for, the one who is called into the work of the kingdom of heaven just as you. They are one who is part of the same body in which you are a part of, and that you are not complete until they are whole and healed and are flourishing. It is easier to serve our neighbors without love. It requires nothing of us. But Christ calls us into a very narrow path where love guides us and goads us and changes us and sanctifies us. Little children, The world is overwhelmed with loving words that mean nothing and are sound and fury signifying nothing. What the world really needs is your service, but only if it is rooted totally in God's endless love.